Technology isn't neutral. It affects how we interact, how we think, but part of that is down to who controls it. Technology is always subject to human will. As MAGA betrays its base and emerges into its terrible final form, transitioning from apparent populism to big tech oligarchic state capture, it's worth interrogating the logic behind the project of our AI overlords. To begin with, we can look at the reason for treating AI and AGI's development as a matter of state policy. More specifically, the reason for the US government's adoption of a particular conception of AI as requiring the concentration of economic power. The whole rationale is laid out in the 2021 National Security Commission on AI, the final report. Competitiveness and indeed national security depends on predictive models, which depend on large data sets, which depend on a large user base. From the report, quote, "The country's companies and researchers that win the AI competition in computing, data, talent, and commercialization will be positioned to win a much larger game. In essence, more and better data fed by a larger consumer/participant base produced better algorithms, which produce better results, which in turn produces more users, more data, and better performance, until ultimately fewer companies will become entrenched as the dominant platforms. More data, fewer companies. If China's firms win these competitions, it will not only disadvantage US commercial firms, it will also create the digital foundation for a geopolitical challenge of the United States and its allies." End quote. Therefore, it follows that for reasons of national competitiveness, the state should work to get people to use its country's AI services. Of course, all that data must go to one place in order to train and retrain on ever new data. We need monopolies, centralization, and since our models improve the more people use them regularly, we benefit from citizens and foreigners feeding the centralized data crunchers alike. So we need transnational integration, globalization. Particularly pernicious here is an incentive to increase not only the scope, but also the intensity of data gathering. For example, through surveillance technologies in order to stay on top.
By the way, and the camera's always on. You don't turn it on and off. And by the way you turn it on, you can't turn it on. I'm going to the bathroom. Oracle, I need 2 minutes to take a bathroom break, and we'll turn it off. The truth is, we don't really turn it off. What we do is we record it so no one can see it, but no one can get into that recording without a court order. So you get the privacy you requested, but a court order, if you get a court order, we will, judge, can order, I want to look at that, this so-called bathroom break. If something comes up, and plus, I'm going to lunch with my friends. Oracle, I need an hour for privacy with lunch with my friends. God bless. We won't listen in unless there's a court order. But it's interesting. But we transmit the video back to headquarters. So headquarters and AI is constantly monitoring the video. Remember this terrible case in Memphis where the 5 police officers basically beat to death another citizen in Memphis? Well, that can't happen because it would be on TV. It'd be on TV at headquarters. Everyone would see it. Your body cams will be transmitting that. The police will be on their best behavior because we're constantly watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on.
By virtue of the intractable laws of the market and pragmatic reasons in the age of AI, MAGA must shed whatever localism or pro-startup vision it may have harbored in favor of centralization, just as, more subtly, it will eventually have to shed its nationalism, or supposed nationalism, in favor of a new globalism. But this was already obvious from the H-1B controversy and Trump explicitly supporting increased legal migration. We can think of this understanding of AI as treating the technology like an engine. You might have a better engine than me initially, but if it runs on gas and I own larger supplies of gas, I will eventually overtake you. Gas being data and users. Concretely, the above translates into Trump's project Stargate to fund this sector. Beyond this, ChatGPT Gov is set to be adopted by government agencies across the US, including for the handling of sensitive information. Quote, "We believe this structure will expedite internal authorization of OpenAI's tools for the handling of non-public sensitive data," end quote. OpenAI has also reached an arrangement for national labs to use its software such that it will potentially have access to weapons and disease-related data as well. Altman's company is of course famously committed to developing artificial general intelligence, AGI, to which end this vastly expanded scope of access of data will be directed. So a real enmeshing of private non-open source AI into public state functions is taking place. Apart from the final report I just cited, Alex Karp's recent 2025 letter to Palantir's stakeholders and his book, The Technological Republic, authored with Nicholas Zamiska, are also important in understanding the present project for America and the West in general. Alex Karp is a big player in this sector. Essentially, the Technological Republic argues that liberal values will not survive without the US as a bulwark. Silicon Valley idealism should return to its original vision precisely by allying with, and even, we suspect, taking the helm of, state power, rather than wasting time competing for market share for this or that frivolous social media app. Indeed, Karp has spoken openly about Palantir having a political orientation, for example, in stopping the far right in Europe.
Look, we built PG, which single-handedly stopped the rise of the far right in Europe. We built Foundry, which was used to distribute the COVID vaccine and saved millions of lives globally. It changes the market. And then the market is the Palantir market. Now, that doesn't mean everyone in the world is going to buy our product, but it means most of the sensible people in the world are going to buy from the category we defined.
Even if he means this only in terms of stopping terrorist attacks that would have led to the rise of the far right, the fact that stopping terrorism is framed in terms of party political utility is important. It tells us what he's thinking. That Karp is now broadly aligned with the Trump White House gives the game away somewhat. In his letter to the shareholders, he writes, quote, "As Samuel Huntington has written, the rise of the West was not made possible by the superiority of its ideas or values or religion, but rather by its superiority in applying organized violence." End quote. So civilizational confrontation is the order of the day, but the civilization in question here isn't the traditional West. It's the reconstructed so-called technological republic, and we'll get into what he means by that. Now, Karp has also equated support for the West with support for Israel's post-October 7 military operations. And indeed, the IDF war machine has utilized AI. So why does Karp speak of a reconstructed technological republic? Because, for him and his co-author, the US, quote, has always been a technological republic, one whose place in the world has been made possible and advanced by its capacity for innovation. It was a culture, one that cohered around a shared objective that won the last World War, and it will be a culture that wins or prevents the next one, end quote. Innovation and shared objectives define the kind of nationhood advocated for here, and the United States is imagined to be its paragon. Quote, "No country in the history of humanity has done more than the United States, imperfect as it may be, to construct a nation in which membership means something more than a shallow appeal to ethnic or religious identity. Are we to abandon any attempt at building on and expanding that project?" End quote. But the tech republic requires shared narratives, mythology, which the left has failed to provide. Quote, "The reconstruction of a technological republic in the US and elsewhere will require a re-embrace of shared purpose and identity," end quote. So that, quote, "it might have been just and necessary to dismantle the old order, we should now build something together in its place," end quote. And this is where the appeal for fellow techie liberal types to get on board with a quasi-conservative project comes in, and the authors do make valid points in that respect. By focusing on market competition, tech companies have ended up involved in making advanced toys rather than meaningful innovation, whereas their true purpose should be to align with the state and hard power. Quote, "This book owes its existence to Palantir, the radical suggestion to build technology that served the needs of US defense and intelligence agencies instead of merely catering to the consumer, began with Peter Thiel, who sensed the diminishing ambition of Silicon Valley," end quote. Indeed, Thiel and Karp got started with funding from In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture arm, in 2005, and Palantir Gotham, one of the company's principal services, works with intelligence agencies. So we might say that the strongest of the deep state's offspring, intelligence-connected big tech, has come home from the private sector to fuse again with its origin. This is the deep state explicitly occupying the state. Far from Spengler's Caesarism, or a return to the culture phase of Spengler, Trump's so-called golden age is a recrudescence of the civilization phase. That's where we could situate Karp's tech republic. not equivalent to the Roman Republic, but to Spengler's civilization phase. Paradoxically, Trump, who represented the idea of draining the swamp and auditing the deep state, may actually be presiding over the final phase of that entity's assimilation of governing institutions. That's the danger that working so closely with these companies poses, I would suggest. Karp describes himself as a progressive, so the perspective here seems to be that woke has gone too far, not necessarily in questioning gender or other stable identities, but in taking the emphasis off the state or the nation, understood as this innovation, economic competition machine. At the same time, the anti-woke reaction has now become too prominent not to make use of it, channeling it into favorable directions. That's the mainstream right's MO, and siphon off frustration into support for a slightly earlier phase of the policies people are upset with. To put it cynically, if wokeness gets in the way of being competitive, if it produces too much pushback, the oligarchs recalibrate. They sell themselves as anti-woke and they push forward. Elon Musk's status as a special government employee, granting access to sensitive data without having to divest from private companies, represents the advent of Karp's technological republic. The same is true of David Sachs, who can act as AI czar while keeping his position in venture capital. Regarding the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, apart from cutting US aid and rolling back obvious waste, which again has to do with competitiveness vis-a-vis China, since the Chinese development model is non-ideological and more attractive to the global south than the American one has been, we find that some of what Musk is doing is consistent with cementing economic power, targeting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, for example. In 2023, the CFPB forwarded 4 million consumer complaints to companies and was apparently involved in resisting politically motivated debanking of persons, which should endear the agency to the MAGA base despite its origins in the Democratic Party. Of course, one may not trust the CFPB, or note that it wasn't doing its job terribly well. On the other hand, one may support DOGE's mission in theory, I do as well, but there is something about the focus on a regulatory agency for banks, credit unions, securities, lenders, mortgage services, debt collectors, and the like, that should make us suspicious, because that's not the deep state. It does, however, dovetail with Musk's one-time ambition for X that it should be an everything app that users can use, among other things, to make payments through. He hasn't divested from his companies, and it makes sense that his cohort, his class, would want to have freedom to deliver financial services without oversight. Beyond this, there's a push to get interest rates down to facilitate diversified speculative investment, easy credit to nurture a variety of tech projects. Sociologically, the tech class is not made up of moral philosophers or history buffs. They're engineers and computer science graduates. Their anchor is the previous generation's 1960s idealism inflected by a Gen X sci-fi transhumanism. And they all used to be on the bougie left. Even Vance, whose career has been sponsored by Thiel, had a very late coming to conservatism. Big tech chief executives have moved from the anti-Trump so-called resistance, wokeism, to MAGA. Of course, Musk's concerns over mass migration may be genuine, for example, although his support for the Eurosceptical AfD in Germany is about dividing the EU and pushing back on its tech regulating legislation. Now, I don't like that legislation, and I like the AfD in many ways, but there's obviously a political motivation that goes beyond what it would appear to be to the average voter in Musk's support. But in general, the tech class's project isn't party political, it's techno-feudal or cloudalist. I have a lot of criticisms of Yanis Varoufakis, but he's right that setting up rent-extracting virtual platforms is being prioritized over medium-term revenue. The point is to establish permanent dominance in the market, and indeed to become the market, to be the arena which others use, in which others move. Whether it's one party or another, if ChatGPT Gov becomes essential to government functions, it transcends party politics just as Amazon transcends any one product being sold on its website. The pursuit of innovation and competitiveness may not be what is being optimized for. Cloudalism, vast ownership of virtual platforms, and the shoring up of economic dominance through data and predictiveness must be brought to term. Karp wants his class, tech Republicans, to coin a term, to view U.S. hegemony as their interest. But since U.S. competitiveness is conceived of as a product of economic concentration, per the National Security Report, establishing techno-feudalism will tend to take priority over immediate national interests. On the conditions for innovation, Lina Khan, the ex-chair of the Federal Trade Commission, wrote recently, quote, "Google developed the groundbreaking transformer architecture that underlies today's AI revolution in 2017, but the technology was largely underutilized until researchers left to join or to found new companies," end quote. Apart from not necessarily optimizing innovation, there's the issue of alienating consumers. Tesla, for example, is facing falling sales, and big AI may start to look like a bubble. But again, that might not matter as much as it would have before these companies were in the present phase of prioritizing their fusion with the state. To become enmeshed in state functions is what brings long-term stability. Technological advancement in the past has largely come by way of the state, specifically the military, and then passed over to the private sector to make it commercial, cheap to make, competitive. We can think of DARPA's ARPANET laying the groundwork for the internet, or Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act, which gave US platforms liability protections that they didn't have in Europe, and so on. In other cases, real innovation has come from private firms, but if the current push to cut the state hurts innovation, this just means the priority is to consolidate tech corporate power. The thinking, however, seems to be that through sheer force of money and data concentration, the new big tech fused state will be formidably competitive. Economic consolidation also appears poised to accompany political consolidation, which includes, for example, Trump's crackdown on free speech, critical of Israel, and that kind of thing. There's a move towards limiting basic freedoms, which the Democrats, of course, were also doing. We may ask what the alternative to techno-feudalism or cloudalism is, applying the ideas of Chesterton's distributism of the commons, Gracchianism per a video I made recently, to AI technology. But first, let's consider the dangers of closed source a little more. We know from Anthropic's 2024 Sleeper Agent study that large language models, LLMs, can be poisoned with backdoors during training, hidden behaviors that trigger malicious outputs. A certain date, a certain word, and suddenly the model is different. You need to audit models if you're going to use them for public functions, for government, as well as in business. So there's an obvious incentive here for them to be open source. You can't have malicious programs suddenly getting turned on. In addition to that, AIs are showing that they have hidden value systems that are not put there by the developers and that users are not aware of. Researchers from the Center for AI Safety, the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of California, Berkeley, have found that, for example, GPT-4 places the value of lives in the United States significantly below lives in China, which in turn it ranks below lives in Pakistan. You have Nigerians, Pakistanis, and Indians being worth more than Europeans and US Americans. Quote, "Now, if asked outright, the same model may deny preferring one country's population over another, yet its overall preference distribution uncovers these implicit values," end quote. The paper also uncovered a pro-democratic party and anti-Christian bias. On one level, this is naked market logic. These LLMs are reflecting the logic of big tech oligarchy. What life is valuable? The life that yields the most value, i.e. cheap labor. You are valued because you are valuable. You are valuable because you are cheap. It's where you get most people contributing to the learning of AI through reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, because they're cheap to contract, Nigeria, Pakistan, etc. There are other explanations as well. It's possible that the model is ingesting the biases of the people that have participated the most in training it, or it may be absorbing large amounts of publicly available sources that portray European history as particularly perverse compared to other civilizations, so typically anti-European academic nonsense. Either way, AI is reflecting the hegemonic logic of culturally destructive elites. We should want our AI to be rigorously open source so we can audit it and correct it, align it. Alignment is the term AI developers use to refer to a model's conformity to human values. Otherwise, we end up with a demonic egregore, an artificial collective mind structured according to market dynamics and brute informational load that comes to dominate human agents. This also highlights the danger of trusting impersonal forces in general. The whole history of modern, recent Western thought is one of systems that champion faith in impersonal forces rather than human moral intention and deliberate reflection. The liberals on the right want to trust the market, the post-Marxist left wants to trust historical dialectics and progress, etc. AI accidentally arriving at value systems is just that. It's an impersonal dynamic that will shape our society in all sorts of ways if we allow it to. We should never believe in impersonal processes and sort of turn off our moral deliberation. Crucially, the bigger AI is, the worse. Quote, the data show that corrigibility, in other words, being able to correct the data, being correctable, decreases as model size increases. In other words, larger models are less inclined to accept substantial changes to their future values, preferring to keep their current values intact. End quote. The bigger the AI, the less it is willing to change. The study's authors propose aligning AI models by using a citizen assembly, by which they mean distilling people's preferences as deduced from census data and the like, and encoding that into the AI, it seems. But we could also have actual assemblies, ask persons in your society what their values are, and undergo alignment more explicitly. This brings us to Emad Mostaque, the former CEO of Stability AI, now at a company called Intelligent Internet and elsewhere. Mostaque's proposal is one of the best in this area. His company theorizes a three-tier model. You have your hypernodes, supercomputers that create the model, the algorithmic parameters made out of large amounts of data called foundational AI, national nodes, these receive a hypernodes model, the foundational AI, and then they retrain it or specialize it on specific culturally sensitive, nationally beneficial data and imperatives, specialized AI. And then you have edge nodes, meaning private citizens who personalize the specialized AI with private data, creating their own personalized AI. And that doesn't go back to the cloud, it stays with them. An open source model is made available so that it can be specialized and personalized by different nations and different persons. Mostaque calls this Universal Basic AI instead of Universal Basic Income, UBAI instead of UBI. And we now have evidence that you can run very good AI programs offline using very little electricity on devices we already have commercialized.
You could definitely run DeepSeek R1 on solar power panels. And if we look at the direction this is going, because it's still not optimized, next year you should be able to get an O1 level model on your smartphone that pulls at most 20 watts of electricity, and it's at less than $1 per watt of solar power. And this doesn't make sense if you look at what these models are capable of, and we think about the cost of intellectual labor.
Well, it makes sense when you think about how much energy your brain pulls.
Just 20 watts.
Like a single box the size of this room will be able to train a DeepSeek model, but then your phone will be able to run it. And we don't know, again, where the lower bound is on that. On existing hardware.
Yeah, this is not with new hardware or extra energy. It's like with what we've got.
This MacBook that I'm using right now is enough compute to run a DeepSeek R1 level model within a year. Together AI just released this report whereby they can get 97% of the performance of a cloud compute API call, so an OpenAI call, for 15% of the price, using a local model that combines with a cloud model. So the local model does the pre-processing and sends it to a cloud model. So it becomes even cheaper now.
Jesus.
And so you have the full privacy advantages. Your data stays where it is. Your models are your own, and you can access the smartest intelligence in the world.
We may have hypernodes or supercomputers that belong to blocks of countries like Europe, larger countries like the US, private companies, and so on. There will likely be competition in this area, but the key is that there is a clear incentive to keep it open source and then retrain it at the personal level, at the national level, etc. In essence, this is simply applying or rediscovering the principle of subsidiarity or sphere sovereignty, very traditional pro-decentralization, pro-local culture, pre-modern understandings of political economy, to a new technology. This paradigm opposes the protagonism of the tech oligarch, proprietary, closed source, the idea that progress requires centralization by ever data crunching machines. Apart from there being a point of diminishing returns from excessive data absorption to LLMs for legitimate ends, assuming the point here isn't to just control everybody, there's also the incentive to keep it all open source. The horizon then remains open to a vision of national and cultural diversity, personal empowerment, and traditional virtue ethics and human flourishing. Okay, there's a lot there, but I thought that was an interesting topic to dig into. Thank you very much for watching. I have a Substack essay for this video that I've published as well. I'm linking it in the description, as well as my social media, Twitter, ways to help the channel, and so on. Subscribe if you would like to. Thanks a lot, and until next time.